So what I'd like to do today is show you a 10-word phrase that has the power to transform your most difficult conversations. Those kind of conversations that you need to have in order to express something really important to you, but are the kind of conversations that unfortunately so often descend into argument and upset. And so what I'm going to show you today is a 10-word phrase that is often really successful at allowing you to still have that conversation and still express everything that you want to say without compromise, but do it in such a way that it takes the heat out of the conversation and that ensures that the other person hears you rather than resorts to defensiveness. Often we can say things in such a way that the other person will become very defensive, and in the same way others tell us things that they need us to hear in such a way that we become defensive. And so by starting what you need to say with this 10-word phrase will transform much of that, so that you can actually have a conversation where, rather than it descend into that argument and upset, you get what you really want, which is to be heard and hopefully to get some connection from that conversation. Now, this 10-word phrase that I'm going to share with you in a moment is particularly good for what I would refer to as this means that thinking. And when I talk about this means that thinking, it's something that we've all done and all do. And it's that sense where a person takes an action or does something that we may not like, and we translate it into something else. So when we see them do this, we decide that it means that. So every day we ask, say, our partner, for instance, to, pick their clothes up off the floor. And every day they don't do it. And to them, it might just simply be that they're not picking the clothes off the floor. But to us, these things always have much more import underneath them, don't they? So to us, it's because I keep asking them to do that and they don't, what this means is that they don't care about me. And so you'll notice this in your own life too, that there'll be this means that thinking will kind of automatically occur as we interpret the actions of others and we interpret the behaviour of those, especially those who are closest to us. The fact that they did this means that. And so you'll notice this means that thinking a lot. So somebody might show up half an hour later than they agreed to show up, and we'll go into this means that thinking again. This, the fact that they've showed up half an hour late, means that they don't respect me, they don't respect my time, they don't care about me, I'm not part of their consideration, I'm not important. And so you can see that jump that's happened there, where we interpret the meaning of that particular act. And so when we actually start to talk to the person about it, we will go straight into, you don't care about me. We'll go straight into, I'm not important to you and I'm sick of it. We'll go and lead with the interpretation. And of course, the other person will often then become quite defensive. They know they're in trouble there. And they've actually got something quite big to defend here. It's not simply that they didn't pick their clothes up off the floor. It's, you don't care about me. And that's heavier, isn't it, for both of you? So there's a 10-word phrase that you can use instead in order to introduce that interpretation. And when I say a 10-word phrase, you can play around with it. It doesn't have to be exactly as I've just said. But the idea is to own the fact that what's going on with this means that thinking is that you're actually telling yourself a story. So when your partner doesn't pick their clothes up off the floor, you're telling yourself a story that means that they don't care about you. And so the phrase basically is that when you start to introduce how you're feeling, start with that. Say, I notice that I'm telling myself a story that you don't care about me. Now you notice the way in those first 10 words I introduced it. I notice that I am telling myself a story that, and there's your 10 words. There's your 10-word phrase to introduce the concept. Because there's a difference between saying, you don't care about me, which is stated as fact, and saying to the other person, I notice that I'm telling myself a story that you don't care about me. That latter one is quite vulnerable, isn't it? It's not even an attack. It's a sharing of what's going on within you. It's a distancing as well. It's an acknowledgement that this is a story rather than something necessarily real. It invites the other person to take notice of what's going on for you rather than having to defend themselves from an attack. When you say to someone, you don't care about me, because it's stated as such a fact, the other person will defend it. But when you say, I notice that I'm telling myself a story that you don't care about me, it takes away all that weight, because it takes away the idea that this is a fact. It's simply sharing your internal process and your fears with the other person. So it's much, much less likely, because of that separation from fact into story, from fact into internal process, it's much less likely to descend into the argument and upset, and much more likely to introduce some vulnerability into the conversation where you can both talk about this issue and get the reassurance that you might need, or even get some of the changes that you might need, because you're both actually there in the conversation together, rather than one person being in attack mode and the other person going into defense and then creating that disconnection between you both. So what I'm inviting you to do is notice your this means that thinking. It'll come up a lot because it just does, But translate it so that when you express that important stuff to the person that you need to express it with, see how that phrase feels. I notice that I'm telling myself a story that. And then you can name the interpretation in the same way, but without all the heat, and usually without the argument and upset as well. So if you find this idea useful, please spread it about, share the podcast. You can subscribe to the podcast as well, wherever you get your podcasts. You can review it, which would be really helpful, on Apple Podcasts. And you can find us on YouTube at asliceoftherapy.com. And you can work with me, Alun Parry, directly. I'm at the Liverpool Psychotherapy practice, which you'll find online at liverpoolpsychotherapy.co.uk. Thanks for listening. I'll see you tomorrow.